Is USAID funding terrorism in Nigeria? A comprehensive investigation. In recent years, allegations have emerged regarding the potential role of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, in indirectly funding terrorist organizations such as Boko Haram, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda in Nigeria. These claims, primarily advanced by U.S. Congressman Scott Perry, led to President Trump suspending the program via executive order. This development has sparked widespread debate about the intentions, effectiveness, transparency, and geopolitical implications of U.S. foreign aid programs in Nigeria. This investigation delves deeply into these allegations, examining their validity, the broader context of U.S.-Nigeria relations, and the potential consequences for both nations. What are the allegations against USAID? Congressman Scott Perry has raised concerns that USAID's foreign aid programs in Nigeria may be inadvertently or intentionally facilitating terrorism.
Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS-Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel, entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan, because Pakistan's right next door. USAID spent $840 million in the last 20 years on Pakistan's education-related program. It includes $136 million to build 120 schools, of which there is zero evidence that any of them were built. Why would there be any evidence? The Inspector General can't get in to see them. But you know what? We doubled down and spent $20 million from USAID to create educational television programs for children unable to attend the physical school. Yeah, they can't attend it because it doesn't exist. You paid for it. Somebody else got the money. You are paying for terrorism. This has got to end. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
According to Perry, funds intended for humanitarian and development purposes are being diverted into the hands of extremist groups like Boko Haram through corrupt officials, local militias, or criminal networks. He argues that weak oversight and poor regulation create vulnerabilities that allow insurgent groups to exploit aid channels. While Perry's claims have garnered significant attention, they remain largely unsubstantiated, with concrete evidence.
I think we've talked to international community. Let's find out the funding. When they started surrendering, by the time we left, so as we speak, we have over 120,000 that have surrendered. Most of them, when you find them, they are coming with hard currencies. How did they get them? How are they funded? How did they get the training? How did they get the... Well, maybe an international conspiracy, you don't know. Who knows? How are they be able to sustain themselves for 15 years? That is one question I think everybody should ask himself. For Nigeria to be able to hold them, and you go to Nigeria, everything looks simple.
Critics argue that his allegations reflect political commentary rather than thorough investigation, pointing out the absence of specific cases linking USAID funds directly to terrorism. Nonetheless, the possibility of unintended consequences in foreign aid programs cannot be dismissed, especially in countries plagued by corruption and weak governance. The central concern lies in the risk of aid being siphoned off by corrupt officials or falling into the hands of militant groups. Fragile states like Nigeria, where governance is weak and corruption rampant, and some regions are agitating to have an autonomous country, Biafra, are particularly vulnerable to such mismanagement. For example, local military units and political figures in northeastern Nigeria, areas most affected by Boko Haram insurgency, have been accused of diverting international funds for personal gain or even selling them to insurgents. Apart from that, extremist groups like Boko Haram have demonstrated an ability to capitalize on the international presence in their regions, extorting humanitarian organizations or intercepting aid supplies. Although there is currently no definitive evidence proving that USAID knowingly funds Boko Haram or other terrorist organizations, the broader issue of corruption and weak oversight in Nigeria remains a valid concern. Is USAID linked to Nigeria's disintegration predictions? Claims linking USAID to Nigeria's disintegration are baseless and lack evidence. The American prediction of Nigeria's breakup in 2015 comes from a misunderstanding of the 2005 U.S. report, Mapping Sub-Saharan Africa's Future. This document presented speculative scenarios, one of which briefly mentioned the possibility of Nigeria's collapse, but it was not a concrete prediction. The report discussed various risks and uncertainties, including political instability, but also highlighted positive future possibilities. The document is a tool for exploring potential outcomes, not a plan for action. The idea that USAID aims to cause Nigeria's disintegration misrepresents the agency's role, which has focused on promoting development, health, and education. Addressing corruption and ensuring transparency in aid distribution are key to dispelling such unfounded rumors. What is USAID's historical involvement in Nigeria? USAID has been a major player in Nigerian development for decades, focusing on critical sectors such as health, education, agriculture, and governance. Programs worth $2.8 billion targeting malaria, HIV, AIDS, maternal health, and infrastructure improvement have showcased USAID's positive contributions to the country. For instance, in healthcare, initiatives to combat diseases like malaria and HIV/AIDS have saved countless lives. In education, investments in educational infrastructure aim to empower future generations. In governance, efforts to strengthen democratic institutions and promote transparency align with broader U.S. interests. However, questions persist regarding whether these programs serve purely humanitarian purposes or advance broader geopolitical agendas. Critics argue that USAID's presence in Nigeria has been utilized to shape the country's political landscape, promoting leaders and policies aligned with U.S. interests. Is USAID's aid truly beneficial, or could it be misused? The central question revolves around the effectiveness and accountability of USAID's aid in Nigeria. Despite substantial financial aid allocated to Nigeria over the years, concerns are rising over the lack of tangible improvements in critical sectors like healthcare, infrastructure, and poverty alleviation. Persistent challenges, such as underfunded healthcare systems, crumbling hospitals, and widespread poverty, highlight the inefficiencies in aid distribution. A particularly vocal group of critics, including Sir Dixon and Dr. Kelechi Ugonna, have called for transparency, questioning the effectiveness of the funds. Notably, previous scandals, such as the mismanagement of funds allocated to the HIV/AIDS program, have further fueled skepticism about the oversight of these resources. Critics also point out that fragile states like Nigeria are prone to misuse of aid due to systemic corruption and weak governance. For example, funds meant for development have allegedly been diverted to support insurgent activities. Insurgent groups like Boko Haram have exploited aid channels, extorting humanitarian organizations or intercepting supplies. This raises the need for stricter monitoring and accountability mechanisms to ensure that foreign aid achieves its intended purpose without unintended consequences. Has USAID been involved in funding terrorist groups in other countries? To understand Perry's allegations in a broader context, it is helpful to examine historical precedents where U.S. foreign aid or covert operations contributed to the rise of extremist groups. Afghanistan in the 1980s. The U.S. supported Afghan Mujahideen fighters against Soviet forces, but some of these fighters later formed the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, posing a direct threat to U.S. security. Balkans in 1990s. U.S. funding to rebel groups raised questions about unintended consequences, as some recipients had ties to terrorist organizations. Haiti in 2021. The assassination of President Jovenel Moïse plunged Haiti into political instability, with armed gangs expanding their power and influence. While USAID provided significant humanitarian assistance, the country's descent into chaos raises concerns about the effectiveness of aid programs in volatile environments. These examples illustrate how well-intentioned aid programs can sometimes empower or indirectly support groups that oppose U.S. interests. The situation in Haiti, in particular, underscores the challenges of delivering aid in politically unstable regions and the potential for unintended consequences. Has the U.S. ever interfered in Nigeria's political landscape? Critics allege that the U.S. has played a covert role in influencing Nigerian politics, particularly during key events such as the removal of former President Goodluck Jonathan in 2015. Former President Jonathan accused the Obama administration of undue interference, claiming that President Obama sent Secretary of State John Kerry to protest the rescheduling of the vote and influence the outcome against him.
The level of interference by the Obama's government was very overwhelming. It's not as if I couldn't have won the election even with that. But if, by my own thinking, and also the way some other people look at it, they go outside the normal diplomatic relationship, then it should be mentioned. Sending that person to Nigeria at the eve of election, after Obama even issued a statement directing Nigerians to vote for the next chapter, that tells you something. And we should not sweep these things under the carpet. If a foreign country, or an African country, or even America or any other country interferes with our own elections, we should mention it.
Jonathan described these actions as humiliating and expressed frustration over the perceived meddling in Nigeria's electoral process. In a notable development, just days before the 2015 election, President Obama called for change in Nigeria, which Jonathan interpreted as an endorsement of his opponent, Muhammadu Buhari. During the campaign, both Jonathan and Buhari sought support from U.S. political consultants, reflecting the high stakes of the electoral process. While U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visited Nigeria to advocate for a peaceful and credible election, Jonathan alleged that the U.S. government's actions were designed to influence the election outcome. In subsequent election cycles, Nigerian presidential candidates continued to engage with international platforms, adding to concerns about foreign involvement in the political process. Despite Jonathan's allegations, there is no conclusive evidence proving that the U.S. orchestrated his downfall. However, the U.S.'s documented history of engaging in foreign political processes raises legitimate questions about its true motives in Nigeria. These instances serve as cautionary tales, emphasizing the need for careful consideration and transparency in foreign aid and diplomatic interventions. Are there calls for probe over $2.8 billion USAID spending in Nigeria? There has been mounting pressure on the Nigerian government to launch an investigation into how USAID funds, totaling approximately $2.8 billion between 2022 and 2024, have been spent in the country. Despite substantial financial aid being allocated to Nigeria over the years, concerns are rising over the lack of tangible improvements in critical sectors like healthcare, infrastructure, and poverty alleviation.
Coming out with very detailed documentation proving that this is actually not what it purports to be. This is not simply a humanitarian organization. This is a vast foreign influence peddling institution that funnels U.S. taxpayers' money, billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayers' money, into other people's countries for all sorts of purposes, both known and unknown, primarily at the behest of the so-called secret states, the intelligence establishment. So even anyone with even a basic understanding of national security and how foreign intelligence works knows that that ability to funnel large amounts of money into other people's countries and do things that even the governments in those countries are not aware of cannot be a good thing. At USAID Nigeria on January 29 and January 30 flouted that direct instruction, sent out close to $500,000 to recipients in Nigeria, and the recipients were marked as undisclosed and miscellaneous. Right, so not only was it direct instruction from the president of the country that created this organization, flouted directly, this money, $500,000, which is close to 700 million naira, has been funneled to Nigerian recipients marked as undisclosed and miscellaneous. So where has that money gone? The reason why questions like this are so important, particularly in the African context, is where you have a continent that has the world's poorest people, but it's also a very resource-rich continent. And coincidentally, despite having the world's poorest people with very anemic economies, every 5 minutes, there's a new rebel group, there's a new terror group, there's a new non-state actor that's springing up out of the woodwork from nowhere. And you see there's like semi-literate people walking around with $6,000 machine guns with bullet chains, that each bullet chain is like $100 at least, and they have hundreds of thousands of these. Where do these groups get their funding from?
The dissatisfaction stems from persistent challenges such as underfunded healthcare systems, crumbling hospitals, and widespread poverty, despite billions of dollars in aid. Public figures, including Sir Dixon and Dr. Kelechi Ugonna, have called for transparency, questioning the effectiveness of the funds. Previous scandals, such as the mismanagement of funds allocated to the HIV/AIDS program, have further fueled skepticism about the oversight of these resources. Reports alleging that USAID funds organizations linked to terrorism have sparked criticism of the agency's vetting processes. Critics urge President Tinubu and the Nigerian legislature, including the House of Assembly and Senate, to investigate the spending and hold those responsible accountable. A formal probe could help uncover potential mismanagement, corruption, or inefficiencies, ensuring that foreign aid is better utilized to address Nigeria's pressing needs. How does regime change in Nigeria benefit U.S. global strategy? Instability in Nigeria, particularly political upheaval or regime change, serves several U.S. strategic interests, especially in Africa, a continent that is geopolitically significant for energy, military influence, and economic partnerships. Political instability creates opportunities for the U.S. to assert its influence across various sectors, ensuring that its global strategy remains dominant. Political instability in Nigeria often results in increased military intervention or partnerships through the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM. Established in 2007, AFRICOM's mission includes strengthening the defense capabilities of African nations, countering terrorism, and fostering peace and stability. US involvement provides a strategic foothold in a key geopolitical location. Instability created by insurgent groups, such as Boko Haram and ISWAP, presents opportunities for the US to extend its military footprint in Nigeria. Nigeria, as Africa's largest oil producer and one of the world's top exporters of petroleum, holds a critical role in global energy markets. The US has significant energy security interests tied to Nigeria's oil industry, which supplies raw materials for refining into petroleum products. Political unrest or regime changes can open up opportunities for American businesses to negotiate favorable deals for oil extraction and trade. Companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron, heavily invested in the Nigerian oil industry, benefit from instability that weakens local governance structures. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has significantly impacted African economies, including Nigeria. Chinese investments in infrastructure projects, loans, and trade agreements pose a challenge to US economic and political dominance in Africa. In response, the US positions itself as a counterweight by emphasizing transparent governance and sustainable development. Political instability or regime changes offer the US opportunities to leverage this instability to reinforce its dominance in the region. How does instability in Nigeria serve US interests? Instability in Nigeria, particularly arising from the rise of extremist groups like Boko Haram, serves several strategic interests for the United States. The complexities of Nigeria's security situation present opportunities for the US to maintain a presence in the region and shape the outcomes of key geopolitical dynamics. In terms of counterterrorism efforts, the emergence of Boko Haram provides a critical justification for US military operations in the region. US forces have worked alongside Nigerian military forces and regional partners to train, equip, and provide intelligence support to combat Boko Haram and ISWAP. This collaboration positions the US as a key ally in the fight against terrorism, while ensuring significant influence over security affairs in the region. In terms of energy security, Nigeria's oil and natural gas resources are critical for global energy markets and US interests. Instability often leads to greater dependence on international companies and foreign governments to manage and safeguard the country's oil resources. When local governments face difficulties maintaining order, the US offers military assistance to secure key oil facilities and ensure a stable flow of exports. In terms of geopolitical leverage, by positioning itself as a critical ally in the fight against terrorism and extremism, the US secures its influence in the region. It uses partnerships with Nigerian and other African governments to reinforce its status as a leader in global counterterrorism efforts. Additionally, instability allows the US to counter Chinese influence in Africa, ensuring that Nigeria remains within the Western geopolitical sphere. What is the current Nigerian government's stance on USAID and US influence? Under President Bola Tinubu, Nigeria has adopted a pragmatic approach to its relationship with the United States, particularly concerning USAID and broader US influence. This strategy seeks to balance diplomatic engagement with the imperative to protect national sovereignty and security. In response to the US administration's decision to suspend foreign aid, Nigerian lawmakers allocated an additional $200 million to the health sector in the 2025 budget. This funding aims to mitigate the shortfall from the US aid cuts, ensuring the continuity of critical health programs such as HIV treatment, malaria prevention, and vaccination initiatives. Furthermore, the Nigerian government has initiated measures to absorb approximately 28,000 health workers previously funded by USAID. This move underscores Nigeria's commitment to sustaining essential health services and reducing dependence on external funding sources. What actions can Nigeria take to hold foreign powers accountable? To protect its interests, Nigeria has established the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. The NFIU monitors financial transactions and ensures compliance with international standards. Enacted laws, such as the Money Laundering, Prevention and Prohibition Bill 2022 and the Terrorism, Prevention and Prohibition Bill 2022, aim to strengthen the country's capacity to prevent and prosecute financial crimes. Nigeria can conduct independent audits of programs funded by external entities, leveraging the USAID Office of Inspector General OIG to evaluate the impact and compliance of foreign aid programs within its borders. Establishing its own auditing bodies ensures domestic oversight and reduces the risk of misuse or misallocation of resources. In conclusion, the question of whether USAID is responsible for terrorism in Nigeria remains complex. While no conclusive evidence directly links USAID funding to Boko Haram or other terrorist organizations, the potential for aid to be misused in conflict zones due to corruption, mismanagement, and weak oversight is a real concern. Congressman Perry's allegations, while serious, require further verification before any definitive conclusions can be made. This situation highlights the critical need for foreign governments and aid organizations to be held accountable, especially when their activities may inadvertently contribute to local conflicts or instability. Moving forward, it is essential for both the US and Nigeria to address the underlying causes of extremism, strengthen governance systems, and ensure that foreign aid is used effectively and transparently, without causing unintended harm. As Nigeria faces ongoing challenges related to terrorism and external influences, promoting transparency, accountability, and genuine cooperation will be vital to achieving lasting stability and prosperity. Only through such efforts can the country hope to secure a future free from the threats of extremism and exploitation. Thank you for watching Freedom Square News Analysis. We hope this deep dive into the complexities surrounding USAID and Nigeria has provided valuable insights. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your support helps us continue bringing you thorough investigations and thought-provoking content. See you next time. Stay informed.
Freedom Square.